German Climate Pavilion at COP29 in Baku. Germany. Climate solutions, fast and fair.
Wow, what a full house. Look around. Welcome, everybody. Are you still there? Welcome in the German Climate Pavilion. We are halfway here at the COP29 in Baku, and as we all know, it is a crucial COP, right? It's called the Finance COP, but every COP is about finance. How do we mobilize the investments of climate action? We are starting with you into the second week of the COP. Here on our stage when we debate about the pathways towards transformative climate action, how we drive forward when it comes to just energy transitions, and of course, how do we mobilize the trillions? How do we get these innovative finance mechanisms really going? We're also gonna dive into the work of the International Climate Initive, short IKI. And with that, I once again warmly welcome you all here to the International High Level Event. My name is KatieGallus. I'm pleased to be your moderator for this afternoon. And of course, thanks to you, ladies and gentlemen, joining us virtually here in our live stream. Maybe you're joining us for your after-work tea, going a little bit eastwards of Baku, or you are joining us for your breakfast and lunch when it comes to Central Europe or Latin America and North America. Thanks again for making space in your calendars. Thanks for watching. And with that, let's get started. With no further ado, for the fireside chat here on stage, I welcome now for an exchange on the experiences when it comes to how do we expand renewable energy, how do we expand the just energy transition, the electricity grids, and of course what I mentioned earlier, how do we mobilize a more private investment, a fireside chat with Dr. RobertHabeck and Dr. CrispianOlver. Please join me here on stage. Dr. RobertHabeck, Federal Minister for Economic Affairs and Climate Action, and Dr. CrispianOlver, joining us from South Africa. You're the Executive Director of the Presidential Climate Commission. And as time is always short at COP29, I'd like to dive right in when it comes to the NDCs. It is a hot topic here, and when it comes to optimism, because things, as we all know, they are pretty turbulent, not just talking about weather, climate, but also politically turbulent times. Minister Habeck, all countries, they need to submit new NDCs by 2025. So what is needed, and how can we make sure that there will be more ambition for more NDCs coming along? What is needed from your side? What is your call to action?
So hello everyone. I can tell a little bit about my day, and that was mainly focused about decarbonizing industries. So if you look in the NDCs, you see, I would say, a lot of movement. Maybe we come in a moment to South Africa, because this is really, really interesting what's happening here. Christian just explained to me after my visit 2 years ago that a lot of turnaround happened there. But now coming back to your question, if you look to the existing NDCs, the focus is on energy. Rightly so, of course. But for Germany and for the world, you have to see that 25% of the emissions are coming from the industries. So my argument here on this COP is to bring industries into the climate action movement and decarbonize them as well and make them part of the next round of NDCs. And if you don't stop me, I talk for ages about concrete, cement and steel industry, but I can tell you there was a lot of gathering today and some concrete results already on the ground.
Let's talk about that in a second round. Maybe Crispian, Minister Habeck just mentioned a big turnaround in South Africa. Can I finally delete my load shedding app because the grid is completely transitioned? Or what is the big turnaround?
So we're now at 250 days without load shedding. So it's a huge achievement, and a lot of that credit is due to Eskom and the workers there who've got on top of managing the existing coal plants. But these coal plants are old. They are, breaking down more frequently than they should be. And it is time for many of them to come off the grid. But to take them off the grid, we've got to invest in the grid. We've got to massively ramp up renewables. And we've got to drive systemic reforms that bring investment into our energy system. So on those reforms, our president, the one thing he's pushed through is opening up the power market, lifting the cap on embedded generation, separating out transmission and generation. So these are things that have already been done in South Africa. And you're seeing the effect in the market. We've got 8 gigawatts of renewable power now on the grid. We've got another 13 gigawatts at an advanced stage of development. And the private sector tells us there's another 130,000 gigawatts ready to come on once they can get grid access.
So what is now your work when it comes to your role in developing the new NDC? What is planned in that regard?
So we as the Climate Commission are an advisory body. We don't make the decision in government. So we are currently doing the modeling and engaging stakeholders to put forward recommendations on the NDC. What will inform our recommendations is the target of net zero by 2050 and the shape of the emissions trajectory to get there. And we know that that shape needs to be a concave shape. So we need to cut more in the 2030s when the cheaper emission reductions can be done. And as we get to the harder to abate and more expensive reductions, the pace will slow down. So we will recommend a range that is lined up with that trajectory. Obviously, government needs to go through its own decision-making process. So, they will be hearing from all the ministries and they'll make a final decision.
Thank you. Minister Habeck, how can governments then learn from each other? Because everybody is talking about collaboration, about partnerships. The Just Transition Energy partnerships are also, of course, between Germany and South Africa. So maybe you can draw a little bit the picture. What does it really mean to be on that journey of just transition together?
Yes, and I think that the South African-German partnership is very, very good. Maybe one of the best examples I can imagine how an energy and climate partnership is working on the ground. You heard now 8 gigawatt renewables are installed in South Africa. That does not sound much for Germans, as we are installing something like 14 gigawatt solar every year and reaching soon 10 gigawatt wind every year. But the story for me, I'm not an expert for South Africa, but I can tell you out of my memory how this development happened. 2 years ago, I was visiting the country. We met there first time, and I left the country in a very, very dark mood because nothing was really going forward. There were blackouts all over the place. Even when I was in the country, the CEO of the grid company was fired the day I was there. I discussed the problem with the Minister for Energy and said, well, I'm coming from the north of Germany. We have long days in the summer, but the sun is not always shining. And you are in South Africa, you have conditions like hell. Why don't you use it? And he said, well, we are a coal-fired country. I'm a union member. We believe in the unions and we will ever burn coal. That is our future. That is our past, and nothing is going to change. And we tried to explain to him that he can do better, cheaper, and do more for the climate. And nothing was there. Now, it has changed, and maybe a small part of this change is also due to our energy partnership, because experts from my ministry and experts from the German energy scene were coming to your country. They discussed it with the government, how you can reshape the grid, how renewables can fit into a coal-fired grid system or energy system. And maybe one of the most important things is that union members from South Africa were coming to Germany and were meeting with union members in Germany. So of course we have kind of the same discussions when people are afraid to lose their jobs because the time of coal-fired power plants is ending. They are nervous, they are angry, they are asking for a safe save jobs in the future. So we have kind of the similar situation, and we brought them together. And in Germany, maybe the most complicated area is the Lausitz in East Germany. That is our South African coal region, if you can compare it. So, but there are potential answers. We are bringing new industries into the region. The companies themselves are transforming. They are building hydrogen systems. They are producing renewable energy now by huge solar installations. They have one of the biggest battery systems now, and people and the youth in these companies, they are asking now for it. So that is energy partnership working on the ground.
Crispian, would you agree? And when it comes to the term of just transition, it is also a buzzword in some contexts. You know, what makes it then just in the South African context when you were listening to Robert Habeck's pictures and developments and the journey that also Germany, you know, had on the just energy transition journey? Where does South Africa stand?
Yeah, so I mean, what's been amazing about this COP is seeing how this term just transition, I mean, everyone is now talking about just transition. And it's clear whether we're developed or developing countries, we're all having to manage the social and economic consequences of this transition. And, you know, sometimes that's having very dramatic political effects and causing regime change in some instances. So we are, you know, we're on the same journey. We might be going at a slightly different pace, but I think there's an enormous amount to learn from each other. And I mean, I was particularly struck by Germany's Coal Transition Commission, which we've borrowed a lot of the ideas that came out of your commission and the work that went in with Labour into redevelopment of particular areas.
But again, zooming into the partnership and into the mechanisms that also IKI is facilitating, what is helping the most when it comes to working together, when it comes to collaboration, when it comes to the partnership? What is a key learning?
So Germany stood firmly behind South Africa's Just Energy Transition Partnership. And I must tell you, of all of the IPG partners that we were negotiating with, the proportionally the most substantive contribution came from Germany. And that was very instrumental in getting the other partners to up their own contributions and also to make sure that this partnership genuinely leverages up the full financing stack. So, you know, obviously what we can get in terms of donor collaboration is only a small part of the picture. I mean, we need $100 billion, not the 8.5 billion, the bulk of which must come from the private sector, from MDBs, from our own balance sheet and our own budget in South Africa. So this JETP contribution has been instrumental in helping leverage up all of those parts of the capital stack.
This is, of course, the trillion-dollar question here. How do we mobilize more investment? Robert Habeck, what is your answer to that? Also, how do we include the private sector? Because a lot of discussions and debates are around the question, how do we leverage private capital when it comes to the just energy transition? Do you have an answer to that trillion-dollar question?
Yes, I have an answer, but give me a minute maybe to explain why it's so difficult and why the answer is so needed. First of all, I mean, this is a banality, but I just like to make it clear once again, global warming is global warming. So that means a lot of emissions are coming from different places, but everyone can find an excuse why his country or his industry is not the major polluter of the emission. So, and if this is becoming the normality, nobody will move. That is the problem with global problems. So therefore, there's always the laid-back tendency. Oh, well, I wait, China has to be first, or maybe North Europe has to be first. And we can't afford another delay. That is the second problem, that we have to speed up. I mean, I was here now, it's half a day, I'm here, and most of the talks were about policy issues, but I met some of the colleagues from countries that are heavily hit by floods in this year, in the last months, people were drowning now, not in the future. So we don't have any time to waste. We are too late and we have done too little in the past. So this laid-back, lazy tendency, because the globality of the global warming is really hit by the call for action now. And now means in this year and in the next year, not in 10 years' time. So how do we bridge this? That means that two arguments are not valid. If the rich northwestern hemisphere is pointing to the other countries and saying, we don't allow you to produce enough energy, you can't become as wealthy and rich as we are. This is never going to work. So, of course, India, South Africa, China, all the other countries, Indonesia, they have the same right for their people to create the same wealth, the same educational and health system as we have. On the other hand, if these countries are doing the same as we have done, burning 100-year fossil energies, we are completely messed up. So then that is the framework. We have to be pragmatic about that. So that means that, for example, South Africa can't use the argument and say, well, you have good saying, you have started 200 years ago burning fossil energies, and now we have a lot of time until we only try to act and make global our climate ambitions reality when we have reached the same level of wealth as your country. That would be a mistake. On the other hand, we can forbid South Africa and the other countries, India, Indonesia, and so on, Brazil, to move forward. And therefore, we need just funding. So therefore, we need money, additional money that is easing the burden for the developing countries to get the same privileges as we are living as a normality. Where should the money come from? So my answer is additional money. We should look at the benefits of burning fossil energies. And I don't mean that the companies who are selling gas and oil to the world have not the right to earn some money, as we are the users of them. We are using natural gas in Germany and in Europe, and a lot of cars are still running on diesel. So, of course, there is usage, but windfall profits. So, taking this necessity and becoming richer and richer by the day, there's no reason for that. We can use some of the money to help the people in the global south to speed up their transformation, to ease the burden of the people, and to fund lost and damaged answers. That would be my answer. There I would look to. And then, of course, most of these companies, or some of these companies, are state-owned companies. So in the end, the money is the same. It's belonging in one form or another to the governments. And then we have to discuss with the governments to also take their share of that. That means that Europe and Germany has to stand to its responsibility, scale up maybe also their amount of funding. But if we are doing funding and the damage becomes bigger and bigger by the day because there's no reason for the oil and gas companies to decrease their production, then it's a basket without a bottom. So they have to be included. That will be my answer.
Is he winning the $1 trillion for that answer, Crispian?
So, can I bring this back to the starting point? Because you know, you started this conversation about NDCs and ambition, and you know, to be blunt, for developing countries to see a path to be truly ambitious, we need to see a path for our economies to also be prosperous, and climate ambition and prosperity go absolutely hand in hand. The integral sort of element of the just transition framework that we talk about is livelihoods and jobs and skills. And you know, today the focus is on human development here. It's the theme day. So you know, we need to just note that. And that means we need fair and just trading conditions that take account of the differential pace of transition between developed and developing countries. And we need to be able to mobilize the financial resources. And many developing countries, I mean, even my own, are fiscally constrained. We have excessive debt burdens. And we, in driving the in mobilizing the capital stack and bringing the private sector in at scale, we need that core of ODA grant finance that helps unlock change and enables us to leverage up the other parts of the financing stack.
I'd like to zoom in here quickly, Crispian. In designing the NDCs, how do you also include the private sector to make out a business case also out of that? Is that within the process of your NDC process?
So we consult very widely, and let me say the private sector's got an integral role to play in terms of determining NDC ambition. The last NDC that we submitted was built on the back of a business initiative led by the national NBI to do these just transition pathways that showed business community in South Africa that it's technically and financially feasible to get to net zero by mid-century. And that recognition amongst the business community in South Africa enabled government to be bolder. And it was on the back of that that we made the recommendation. So we're actively engaging business at the moment in South Africa, and I'm hoping they're going to back ambitious NDC recommendations that we'll be making.
And again, coming back to the term just energy transition, how do you mobilize the people to go forward into the just energy transition, to be motivated and to be fully engaged, to get the population really on board? Because 100,000 jobs are affected when we look and when we zoom into the South African context. And, you know, you've got a new government now for this year. So how is that, when we outlook into the next month and years to come, how do we mobilize the people when it comes to motivation?
So, I mean, that you're asking a very important question, and you know, let me say it's an ongoing process. It's the job is never done in terms of mobilization, and the principle that we're trying to address is one of procedural justice, and procedural justice demands that people that are most affected by a set of decisions are at the table and are not just communicated to, but are involved in the decision-making process and have a voice in it. And that needs to happen not just at a high national level where stakeholders gather. It's got to happen at a power station level and at a local and regional level where real decisions are going to have huge long-term impacts on communities.
Let's look from Baku maybe quickly to Rio, where at the same time the G20 summit is taking place. Would it be possible to get a strong signal from the G20 to really bring the negotiations forward here in the COP29 process? What is your wish in that regard, Minister Habeck?
Yeah, my vision is, yes, of course, but...
is it a realistic wish?
G20 is maybe... after the COP, the next complicated multilateral gathering is G20, I guess, due to all the conflicts that are in the world. And maybe the last 2 weeks have not made it easier to come to an agreement on climate issues there. We will find out. But there's always an answer, not let the slowest define the pace for the fastest and the ones who are going forward. So if it's not possible to find a common agreement, then who should stop the countries or the societies or the industries that are willing to move forward? Because in the end, it's quite simple. Either we become climate neutral as soon as possible. So for Germany, it's 2045 and Europe 2050, and other countries may take a little more time, but in the end, the last 2 or 5% are not the important ones. The 60 or 80 until then, or 90, they are the important ones. So if we have problems to find renewable energies for, I don't know, rescue helicopters, and they fly still with diesel. I think helicopters are easy to fly with electricity, but, or maybe not easy, but possible. Well, then they do. So, but the 90% or the 95% we should reach as soon as possible. And either we achieve this and we have a chance that the loss and damage is not becoming too expensive for the society, for the lives of the people, or we won't. If we achieve this, then the technique of the future, the industry of the future, the goods, the services of the future are climate neutral. So the ones who are the early movers have the chance to create the new value chains and businesses of the future. And the ones who are leaning back and waiting, of course, they don't have to pay the price of being the first movers, but they don't have the same market share as the first movers have. So there's no reason, even if you think from the problems we have in the G20 or in the COP, not to move forward if you are convinced that we need climate action and global warming is a real threat for mankind. And maybe I can give you just some examples that we are not discussing in the preaching to the converted. So these fields of climate activists we are kind of having here in this COP. NATO has described that global warming is one of the biggest security threats, not because it's getting hot, because it's a security issue that leads to maybe to wars. The World Economic Forum in Davos, definitely not a green party think tank. It's the neoliberal Davos Forum counted the casualties of global warming, and they found out it's millions, it's in the millions. So people were losing their lives, and a German study is saying that even with the emissions now, if we keep the 1.5, if we keep to the Paris Agreement, even these emissions will lead to a decrease of the world economy of minus 20%. Even that. So imagine how big the problems of Europe's economy have been in the past. Imagine 20% less growth and wealth for the people. These are disastrous numbers, and they are serious calculations. So if you put it that way, we have to move forward, and the ones who are moving forward have big chances to be profiters of the energy transition and the climate action path.
Well, let's see what the week will bring on different continents, right? Time is always short here at COP, so thanks to both of you for this conversation. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
And before you leave, please, JenniferMorgan, SaliemFakir, Anjali, and EvaKracht, and also AndreaHurtado, come join me for the official press photo, because a lot of people, they have to move around and leave again.
Now it's becoming really interesting. So not that you're not interesting, but now
let's come for the official press photo for the IKI High Level Event. Come together. Here. Come here. Yes. No, you can actually go ahead a little bit closer. So I'm. Who's the main photographer? Everybody! Okay, 1, 2, 3. Thank you, Minister Habeck, and thanks, Crispian. Merci beaucoup. And with a lot of keywords now in the air, of course, we will continue our conversation in a second as we split up the event in different parts to have our conversation when it comes to a just energy transition. Okay, I think we are almost ready, and for that I welcome now for the keynote State Secretary and Special Envoy for International Climate Action at the German Federal Foreign Office here on stage. Please welcome her with a round of applause, JenniferMorgan.
Hi, everyone. It is great to be back on the annual IKI High Level Event. Can I hear it? I can imagine there may be some IKI family and IKI projects in the room. How many people here are somehow involved? Excellent. Okay, so you know what we're talking about. We just had an excellent exchange on just transition in South Africa, in Germany, and globally. And I think here, It's so important because the International Climate Initiative is just a central part of Germany's international commitments to fund climate and biodiversity. Also incredibly important. We'll hear from EvaKracht here in a few minutes. It's something I think many of you know. There's 3 ministries that implement the International Climate Initiative: the Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action, the Ministry for Environment, and the Federal Foreign Office. And this makes IKI even stronger because we each bring in our own different perspectives and know-how to build a strong IKI. And we built this into our strategy, our 2030 strategy, which is really about making IKI fit for the challenge of this decade and getting more integration across, which we know is needed across the board. So as you know, in our strategy, we have competitive calls, which are a very important instrument for us. They ensure that we are able to select projects that deliver the highest quality and really innovative approaches. And here I'm glad that we are able today to launch 2 of these calls on behalf of the 3 IKI ministries. And I get to do this, which is one of the most fun things that you get to do. So the first one is the IKI Thematic call. Together, we intend to provide funding of overall up to 205 million euros for 9 new thematic priorities. So supporting mitigation, resilience, and biodiversity, with several large-scale projects with a funding up to 20 million euros per project. The thematic priorities are focused on the current challenges. They really respond to the needs that we have heard from partner countries. And also, we want to accelerate what's happening here in the Paris Agreement, what's happening in the CBD COP, those outcomes on the ground. There's many examples, but I'm just going to name 3 for you. The first is knowing we're here at the COP, the global stocktake decided to an energy transformation, tripling renewables, doubling efficiency rates, transitioning away from fossil fuels. And the Economics and Climate Action Ministry is very keen to be kind of implementing this package in its entirety. Not a menu, but in its entirety. So improving energy efficiency remains one of the most pressing challenges of our time, but we know doesn't receive as much public attention and funding as the expansion of renewables. IKI wants to really tap into this gap, close this gap, via one of the thematic priorities this year, which looks into innovative business models to scale energy efficiency measures for buildings. We all know how important buildings are. The example from the Environment Ministry, from BMUV, BMUV, I can't say it in English, BMUV, is around the protection, sustainable use, and restoration of ecosystems. Very important to tackle climate change and biodiversity loss together. This is of high relevance in this year's thematic priorities by the Ministry of the Environment. So the ministry is looking for projects, for instance, that leverage private sector finance for the conservation of primary forests, so important, as well as locally led conservation and sustainable use of coastal areas and wetlands. And the third example is one from the Federal Foreign Office, which is looking for innovative project ideas to foster peace, promoting climate adaptation in African countries. This is an idea and an initiative to bring more peace, positive climate action to vulnerable communities that are also affected by fragility and conflicts. It builds on a project that has been successful in Nigeria as an example of actually having different groups come together, build peace, and also alternative livelihoods. So that's the one call, very exciting. The second call is the 6th IKI Small Grants call for proposals for local climate and biodiversity action. This is additional funding to the 205 million. I've been working a lot with civil society organizations my whole life, and I know how much they can achieve in impact with comparatively small amounts of funding. So with its IKI Small Grants, Germany supports local actors, organizations, and institutions in ODA countries with funding for their local solutions. They are on the front line of climate change and where biodiversity happens, and they are close to the people most affected, and they are the actors of change. So it's also a response to we hear about the need for local action, and this is also part of the IKI's DNA, I would say. So in the past 5 years, IKI Small Grants has provided funding for projects in 125 NGOs and institutions in over 50 countries. And for the 6th international call, we want to provide funding for projects with a funding range for 60,000 to 200,000 euros per project. And we think there'll probably be around 20 to 30 with IKI Small Grants in total. So get your ideas flowing. We're very much looking forward to receiving your innovative concepts and project ideas. And I think it's great to be here with the IKI family, and I'll hand it back over to you. It's just, I just want to say in closing, it's a huge privilege, actually, to be working in the ministries, with all of the IKI grantees. There's so much action on the ground. Back to you.
Thank you, JenniferMorgan. Jennifer joined me on our panel, and may I welcome also our panelists here on stage. SaliemFakir will be with us, AnjaliViswamohanan, EvaKracht, and AndreaHurtado Epstein. Join us. Yes, please, feel welcome. Sit down, Eva, Anjali. Okay, yeah. Join me here. Yeah, sure. Hola, bienvenidos. All right. So in that panel round, we of course like to deep dive of some of the keywords that were already mentioned in our previous chat, but also of course with the big question, how do we mobilize the investments that are needed for ambitious NDCs? And with us is JenniferMorgan, as we all know, State Secretary in the Federal Foreign Office, but also with us is AndreaHurtado Epstein. You're the coordinator for Mexico's NDC update at the Mexican Ministry of Environment and Natural Resources. Buenos dias again, thank you. We also have to my left-hand side, we have SaliemFakir, founder and executive director at the African Climate Foundation. And the foundation is really a strategic think tank, a grant-making foundation focused on climate and development issues when it comes on the African continent. Thanks for being here. We do have AnjaliViswamohanan with us. You're the Director of Policy at the Asia Investor Group on Climate Change. Thank you so much for bringing in your perspective. And last but not least, we do have on the left-hand side EvaKracht joining us also from the German government. She is the Director General for International and European Policy at the Federal Ministry for the Environment, Nature Conservation, Nuclear Safety and Consumer Protection. So to all of you, a round of applause, please, for being here. Jennifer, as you know, time is always running, so I'd like to start with you and the trillion-dollar question again. We need trillions. The calls from developing countries in the last week's World Leaders Climate Action Summit, the call was very, very clear. But the question really is, how do we, when we look at the NDCs, how do we mobilize the finance behind these ambitious NDCs that are needed? And how do we connect public money also with private money, because it all comes back to working together also when it comes to finance topics. So again, maybe give us some insights, what's important from your perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, pleasure to be with everyone here. I like to think of, I try not to use the acronym, actually. I like to talk about national climate plans. I like to talk about investment plans. I like to talk about development plans. These plans, in a way, if you think about attracting investment from the private sector, what you need are loud, long legal signals. Those are policies, basically, so that countries are looking at, okay, when I know I want to grow renewables because it creates jobs, because it gives energy security, because it has better air, cleaner air, what are the policies that I need to be putting in place in my economy in order to do that? What are the jobs and skills I need in order to do that as well? And then what are the financing kind of needs that I have? And I think on the renewables example, one good example is guarantees. So how can we as the public sector be using our AAA rating in order to be bringing down the cost of capital for renewable energy, for example, in Africa, where it's now up to 8 times more expensive to build renewables. And so we've started the Green Guarantee Group, which is a group of different financial institutions to see how can we scale up the use of guarantees. And public money, I think, obviously is a key part of the puzzle as well. I think building resilience is very important, and local resilience, and much of the public funds looking at how countries, local partners really can be within their NDC, within their plans, within their national plans, how they can be also having the public funding that's often more difficult to fund through private sector funding to do things like, agriculture, if I think about agriculture and some of those areas.
Absolutely. Thanks for that first impression. Eva, coming to you, of course, when we look into the COPs, I mentioned it earlier, this is the finance COP, but in the end, every COP has to do something with finance COP. And coming out of Cali and the UN Biodiversity COP16, aligning financial investments and aligning the investments for biodiversity, but also for climate and climate change, really tackling these twin crises. What came out of COP, and what is something that you can share with us in tackling both crises when it comes to finding the investment needed?
Well, first of all, let me stress that the Cali COP did not fail. There's ongoing discussions on the financial mechanisms, on the fund structures, but biodiversity finance, international biodiversity finance has been increasing a lot. Well, now, climate and biodiversity crises are closely interlinked. RobertHabeck already quoted NATO as well as the World Economic Forum on stressing the importance of the climate crisis for security and the world economy. The same actors also stressed the role of biodiversity at the same level and with the same kind of importance that they also threaten the global security and global economy. Now, the good news is that there are actually a lot of ways to reach win-win benefits. We can spend the same dollar and reach progress for the climate as well as for biodiversity. So in our public funding inside Germany, also in our International Climate Initiative, we try to use nature-based solutions many times. At the same time, it is very important that in everything we do, there are comprehensive standards and safeguards. So we do not actually, while doing something good for the climate, like forests, growing forests, we do not do harm to biodiversity. It's very important to align all financial flows, not just public money, to these purposes. And one element that is also very important, especially for aligning private money, is the analysis of risk. We've been supporting the task force on nature-related financial disclosure, and companies actually start seeing how reliant their value chains are on nature. So there's a lot that can be done to improve climate as well as biodiversity finance.
So de-risking is a key point when it comes to leveraging private capital, from what I understood. Andrea, let's come to you and let's zoom in into Mexico's context. Mexico, with the new administration taking office in October 2024. Your Environment Minister, Alicia Bárcena, recently shared her perspectives in Times Magazine in expanding renewable energy and decarbonizing state-owned energy companies, and also bringing the private sector players more on board when it comes to designing the NDCs, the action plans, the national climate action plans. So yeah, what can you tell us about it? Let's zoom in and explain to us, what does it mean when you fill that line with life? We bring in the private sector.
This is working. Hi, thank you for the question. Thank you for having me. It's also a pleasure to be in this panel. And let me just start by saying that in her very first speech as President of Mexico, Dr. Claudia Sheinbaum, who is also the first female president in the country, and I think that's not a minor thing to bring up here. I do believe in the intrinsically different nature of female leadership, and she's a climate scientist. She's been an IPCC author, so I think you can expect to see great things from Mexico in the following years. Yeah. Also, I think this is also greetings from Alicia Bárcena, our new Minister of the Environment, another great feminist and great environmentalist. In her first speech, Dr. Sheinbaum said something about, or along the lines of, the well-being of our people can only be secured if we care for our environment and our natural resources. And I think with that, she gave us a very clear mandate that we need to continue to build on our strong social policy, but all over a very strong, a very solid environmental sustainability foundation. And a big part of that, a big part of what we are now calling our humanist, environmental, and ecological policy is the recently announced National Energy Plan. Now, this energy plan seeks to increase the percentage of electricity generation from clean and renewable sources to over 40% by 2030. This is while ensuring, of course, the reliability of the electric system and affordability of prices. This is very important, of course. And to strengthen energy sovereignty, 54% of that generation will be controlled by the Federal Commission on Electricity, CFE. That is to guarantee affordable prices, but also the remaining 46%. I'm sorry, I forgot to say, this is, I think, very important. CFE is already planning to invest $23.4 billion, US dollars, on generation, transmission, and distribution to achieve this goal. Now, for the remaining 46%, we will be, as you said, facilitating participation from the private sector in a way that is responsible. And by responsible, I mean that it is both contributing to local development and respecting the rights of the owners of the land, which in Mexico, in many cases, are indigenous peoples and local communities. And so for that, the Ministry of Energy is developing the mechanisms so that we can move forward with legal pathways for participation. Households and small businesses that generate up to, I think this is breaking up, isn't it? No? Okay. Okay, thank you. So households and small businesses that generate up to 0.7 megawatts will be exempt from permitting for generation for self-sufficiency. This is already bringing it up from 0.5%, which was the previous threshold. For those that are generating between 0.7 and 20 megawatts consumed on-site without access to the grid, CENER will be promoting a more agile process for them to be permitted. And then for further energy, or those who create an energy beyond 20 megawatts and need to connect to the grid, CENER will also be facilitating permitting, but also only transmission will need to be paid for. So with all of this, I think the commitment is clear. Also the commitment to just energy transition, I think, is important to mention. Again, in her very first speech as president, Dr. Sheinbaum mentioned that Pemex, our national oil producer, will be capped to 1.8 billion barrels a day, with a view to, in the midterm, only be supplying to the domestic market. And that is coupled with measures that have been announced on ramping up energy efficiency, on facilitating the installation of photovoltaic panels in the north of the country, clean stoves, so many other things. So let me just end by saying we don't believe there's any inherent conflict between social justice and climate action. On the contrary, we believe in the decarbonization of our economy as an opportunity to build what Dr. Sheinbaum calls shared prosperity.
Just a follow-up question to implement and to follow up with a lot of facilitation that comes along. Is there any time frame, any specific time frame?
That is part of the modeling that is taking place at the moment. As you said, The new administration came in October, so just a month ago. But let me jump ahead to what I know is the next question. Mexico will be presenting an updated NDC sometime next year, exact date TBD. But we will be ramping up our ambition both in mitigation and adaptation. We will be, by the way, publishing our first BTR, Biennial Transparency Report, in December, so you can look forward to more specific numbers by December.
Thank you very much. We're looking forward to read more about it, and of course to have you then back on stage to dive into that again. Thanks, Andrea, and greetings. Anjali, when we hear about leveraging private investment, de-risking investment, I'd like to turn to you, as we talked already previously also about facilitating, but also about collaboration. So when it comes to work together between governments and the private sector to create these risk-sharing mechanisms in any way, what is something that would be a boost for such climate projects from your scientific perspective? What is needed as well to de-risk investment in clean energy?
Thank you. I work with the Asia Investor Group on climate change. I would just like to give some perspective on what we're trying to do through this group so that you understand the context from which my comments come from. So we are an investor network. We work with institutional investors that includes pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, insurance companies, and asset managers. So we work with over 70 of them that manage around 30 trillion USD in AUM. And the objective of AIGCC is to really engage with these investors to help them understand where the climate risks will arise from, especially with regard to their portfolio in Asian markets, but then also look out for opportunities so that they can divert their investments into those opportunities that will help these countries and companies transition faster. Now, through the course of our work, what we've really been able to help financial institutions understand is that climate risk is a financial risk that will affect their returns and the way that they operate in these markets. Right before COP, we wanted to do this exercise to sort of really highlight how far the private finance sector has moved. We surveyed over 50 of the highest, biggest investment companies globally that have investments in Asian markets. We're looking at 50.2 trillion USD of funds. And what we found is that out of these 50 entities that we surveyed, apart from 3 of them, all of them have, frameworks internally that really looks at integrating climate risks and opportunities. And 78% of them have really declared publicly net zero targets, which means that there is a clear intention to be held accountable to the actions that they want to do on climate and sort of help the ecosystem along on climate. But in terms of how much this has translated into investments, only around 38% of them have really sort of made that commitment to invest in climate solutions. And the reason for this fundamental gap is a few. A lot of it is policy associated, and we've sort of discussed it during the course of this panel. One is the access to data. I think it's really important for investors to understand what the problem is, especially in markets that are moving forward now to try and address these risks in terms of transition. So frameworks like ISSB, TNFD is really important for investors to understand at a market level how companies and entities are performing so that we can work with them on creating those solutions and helping them transition. These frameworks, the second category is on frameworks, so transition plans at a national level that can translate into sectoral transition pathways that clearly give investors that idea of how transition is going to happen in these economies. To really understand where capital needs to be plugged in terms of solutions is very important. And policy uncertainty is really the third pillar that applies across climate, but also regular investment. And the thing is that the more you don't address these risks, this will prevent capital from flowing into markets, but then also it will affect the valuation that would lead to higher capital cost. Now, I think the point that I'm trying to make is that there are risks that are applicable to all types of capital that needs to be dealt with to ensure that capital is able to flow into emerging markets. But specifically for climate, what would be fundamental to remove the risks that investors are seeing is clear transition plans. So what we are seeing in terms of NDCs, the more that the NDCs are able to align with a 1.5 degree pathway, it is clearer to the investors that the risk will come down, because climate risk will manifest in terms of impact to assets, to their portfolios. The more that you're able to align with a 1.5-degree pathway, but then also to translate that into clear plans at a national level on how it would affect sectoral transition pathways, so that you can actually work together between the government, the private sector, and companies to really see what types of capital would be required to remove what sort of risks. So for instance, I think one part that I'd like to highlight is that there is this perception that there is a lot of hard-to-abate sectors in several economies, but more prominent in Asian markets. But in fact, when you say hard to abate, it's more that it is expensive to abate and not impossible to abate. So which means that you really need to sort of deep dive into where is it more expensive for the companies, and looking at what types of capital would actually help those companies address those risks. So there might be needs for subsidies and incentives for some parts, but some parts is where like private capital can come in on its own to help these companies along. So it really sort of needs to have that whole ecosystem approach in identifying solutions.
Thank you, Anjali. That was a long list. We were all writing down the to-dos and the homeworks. A clear transition plan. Saliem, you were nodding actively. What would you like to add, especially when reflecting on that first week of COP29, looking a little bit ahead into our second week, you know, when we're looking out and looking for these clear transition plans, what is missing and what's already on a good way forward in that regard? You have a microphone here.
I was about to grab your one. Thank you very much, and nice to meet Jennifer again, and everyone else. I think there are... okay. You have to go? Okay. Okay. There are two parts to this. There's stuff that's going on here, and there's stuff that's going on outside of here. And I think we have to acknowledge that there is a lot of investment potential that sits outside, but agreeing on a very clear signal, both at the G20 and here, is important to give some impetus to the NDCs for next year, because as they come through, they need to be done. NDCs are important, particularly when we did the JETP in South Africa. They were crucial for unlocking larger pools of climate finance. But the amount that is assigned to investment platforms or country platforms inevitably is insufficient, because of the amount that we're looking at, particularly in South Africa, is about $250 billion to $300 billion. So 8.5 is a small amount. It will be true for Mexico, it will be true for Colombia, wherever there's just JETP. So we have to think of more creative ways of bringing...
Who is we?
All of us.
All of, okay,
But,
be precise, please.
I will be precise. In most cases, the investment platforms are government-led processes. They have to be, especially if you're talking about NDCs that have to talk to government commitments and signals. We are working, for example, with a group to try to make the NDCs a lot more investor-focused. So we are developing an investment framework that can be piloted in 3 countries.
Just to quickly introduce.
Sure.
Thank you, JenniferMorgan. I know you have to go to negotiations, so thank you again for joining. Didn't want to interrupt you,
Sure,
but
no problem.
let's rather have a clear cut.
Sure.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks. So they have to be, but as you know that... okay. As you know, no problem.
So many COP casualties, everybody needs to leave. But we will finish.
If you leave, it's fine.
Do you have to leave now or in 2 minutes?
I want to finish.
Okay.
Okay, let's let him speak and then we decide who's leaving. Is that a deal?
Sure.
Again, the priorities.
Even though government has to set the enabling conditions, they can't do it alone. So you have to mobilize funding both domestically and externally. And in Africa, that's a bigger question. In some countries, it can be done a lot more with domestic capital. In other places, it can't be done. And it's even more difficult. I don't know what's the situation in Latin America, but it's a lot more difficult difficult for countries that have high debt, especially the poorer countries. So their ability to be able to do transitions at lower costs is very tough. And that's one of the challenges we will be facing as we move along. So there might be a target, there might be mobilizing additional funds. There still has to be conditions created for the absorption of those funds in country, in the domestic economy.
How do you create these environments, these important ecosystems that are holding up to these variables?
Thank you. I think that's so important. We need a quantum leap in the increasing ambition, right? And that is not going to happen with business as usual. So what our minister is pushing for when she talks about a humanist, ecological, and environmental policy is our very important push for strategic sectors, and by strategic I mean not only sectors that hold huge mitigation potential, but that are also employment intensive, so that we're also able to address inequalities through them by creating tons of decent jobs, and that are also allowing us to build our own national industries around sustainability. So, for example, let's think transportation. In Mexico, and that's the case in a lot of countries in Latin America, we're still very much dependent on fuel and diesel for not just private but also public transportation. If we want to push for a strong transformation there, we can either import the technology, or we can do it by really strengthening our capacities nationally for our national industry to be the producer of the electric buses and batteries and all of the associated components and infrastructure. And what we need in order for that to happen is to, as you were saying, not only de-risk the investments with support from MDBs and others, but we need to aggregate demand. We need to make sure we're providing steady demand for these services so that we're not just decarbonizing the economy, we're also creating jobs, and we're also pushing for a more equal society.
Thank you, Andrea. Do you have to leave now as well? Because you have
I
to
do sincerely apologize,
right.
but yes.
This is your round of applause. We stay and we thank you very much. Mucho obrigado. There we go. I stay. Is that okay? I stay. Anjali, you know, hearing and listening to these perspectives and noting down the to-dos when it comes to the strategic design also of NDCs, how do we bring in the investors also on these, in these spaces, in these rooms of conversation? You know, what is needed to bring in so many more perspectives than we have already in the room, especially when it comes to strategy?
Yeah, I would just say that, you know, investors are really trying hard to engage with governments. In fact, my role at AIGCC is to facilitate engagement between investors and governments so they can really understand the markets that they're trying to invest in better, especially in newer markets. So, for instance, one of the regions that I cover is ASEAN, which is the Southeast Asian markets, which are looking for newer investment from international capital. And one of the, you know, the biggest concerns from international capital is they don't understand what each market really requires in terms of transition. So we're really trying to help investors engage with these markets so that they can understand their transition plans better and see where there are opportunities and really work together in bringing capital. I would just say, I think there's a lot of discussions around NDCs, which is very crucial, but I think it is also important, and I've heard so many conversations at COP about adaptation plans, and there is a huge effort that's happening in terms of NAP 3.0 to really help countries think about how to make adaptation investable as well, because you're looking at billions of dollars of capital that needs to go into these markets to actually help them recover from damages, but then also build resilient economies. And there's a clear role for the private finance sector there as well, which is not being discussed enough. So the more that even in the adaptation planning process, you're able to bring investors in, the better these plans will be and the more investable it is. And I think one fundamental gap that we find in the adaptation planning process across several markets is when it comes to implementing implementation of these adaptation plans, it really sits with the ministries of environment in a lot of countries that's not able to speak the finance language that's bridging the gap between the planning and implementation and attracting of finance. And we are really trying to work with Asian markets in creating that ecosystem where it is the right ministries, where it is a whole of government approach to adaptation that looks at development goals, that looks at the financial products that a government can put out, and then also see where private finance can really come in to plug this gap. So I would say that for all plans that are happening right now in terms of climate responses and climate opportunities and transition, we really need a whole of ecosystem approach, which includes the private finance. And I would say that there are private financiers themselves that are willing to do this, and there are institutions like us on behalf of them that is willing to work with the governments quite closely in creating investable transition plans that looks at not just emissions reductions, but also the integration with nature, water, waste, and the just transition element as well.
Thank you. Eva, I'm coming back to you in a second. Just allow me one more question to Salim, because when we talk about facilitation and new ecosystems and environments for conversation, because it comes down to collaboration, who's missing so often in the room? Who would you like to have more on panels, more in conversation rooms? Which perspective should we include more than ever before, more than we are doing it maybe here at COP29 in the future?
So
Pinpoint.
it depends on which topic you're talking about. For example, today I was talking to somebody about electric vehicles. It's more important to have the original equipment manufacturers in the discussion than somebody writing a report about it. So I don't mean to be rude about that, but it's very important to have the OEMs there, because they'll tell you what needs to be done. They'll tell you how much of localization is possible. I did this in my previous life. I talked to the OEMs, particularly around renewables and storage technologies. So often they don't come to these meetings because it's too abstract, and we have to ground stuff into more investable discussions. It's probably not the right forum to do that, but certainly outside of here we have to do that. And that you'll find that increasingly as we're moving towards net zero, we're talking about technology, we're talking about investments. You have to start talking a lot more to those people who have to figure out how best to implement it.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's always it's always interesting, to ask also the question who we should invite more often, how we should be a door opening ourselves. Eva, coming to you. Of course, there are a lot of keywords, a lot of conclusions. Now, what is something that you noted down, that is something that you would write down on a post-it to not forget? And especially because we are having a reception right after that, what would be an important question that people should mingle around and debate over in the next hour?
Well, we've heard a lot, of course, so this is not an easy task. Maybe a good starting point is what the minister mentioned in the beginning, that of course all countries have and all people have a right to development. And at the same time, we share the responsibility for this planet. So it's not surprising that we ended up talking quite a bit about just transition and what that means. So creating jobs is something Andrea just stressed, as well as creating a more just society. And Crispian also talked about that quite a bit in the beginning. Finance was, of course, an important topic, and we talked about all kinds of different elements of finance. Public money, of course, has a role to play in this, and of course, entirely the public sector has a role to play to leverage finance. That includes ODA, but also domestic money. And also, we heard, for example, from the State Secretary that framework conditions, international plans are important to guide investment. And in addition to that, we need private money. We need to channel private money into the right direction. So, Anjali, you said climate risk is a financial risk. That is an important thing for financial actors to note. We also heard from the minister that moving early can create businesses for the future. So again, a role for the private sector to play. Anjali, you also just stressed that the private finance sector has an important role in all of this. And Saliem, I want to close by saying, let's talk to the people who actually implement this. Very important to get this dialogue going between public actors and private actors and society that implement all the big national plans on the ground. And just to wrap up, I also want to stress again my point of doing this as much as we can together with nature. To wrap up, this is about the IKI thematic call. As you could see on the thematic areas that we chose, we're trying to be innovative. We're trying to to make everybody become creative, think out of the box, bring actors together, and we're very much looking forward to all the proposals.
Thank you very much. To all of you, this is your round of applause. Merci beaucoup. And to all of you in the room now, the reception is just about to start. And of course, as JenniferMorgan mentioned and EvaKracht also underlined, there are 9 thematic priorities of the International Climate Initiative. There are many IKI people in the room, so get along, get connected, mingle around, and then, of course, participate in the calls. And for now, thank you very much for making time in your calendars. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, in our live stream for joining us virtually, maybe for your after-work cocktail or for breakfast. Nevertheless, thank you, and it's great having you on board. Stay a little bit around here now for the reception, and then I'll see you soon again. Merci beaucoup. Thank you.
Welcome to the German Climate Pavilion at COP29 in Baku. Germany. Climate solutions, fast and fair.